Hey, this is Mark Pattison back again with another fantastic episode of Finding Your Summit. And this week we've got a guy by the name of Kenyatta Leal. And this is a guy that grew up in San Diego, California, and he found himself in a lot of trouble. Ultimately, he ended up in prison 25 years to life. Imagine that. As he went along the prison system, he was ultimately moved into San Quentin, a notorious prison. Whether that's right or wrong, that's the way it was back in the day. But he actually counts this as a blessing because they started all these different educational type programs within San Quentin. And one of the programs that he was involved with, he actually became a co-founder of, is called The Last Mile. Very proud of this guy. Such an insightful interview. He really takes accountability for all the things that he did. He played the blame game for 5 or 6 years when he was in prison, didn't think there's going to be any kind of hope. But ultimately, there's a guy who came up to him and asked him what are the 10 most important things in his life that he wanted to accomplish or were important to him. He wrote those things down and essentially became his vision board. And so the next goal for him was, of course, to actually execute how he could become a better person by doing day-to-day things that would lead him to those goals of things that were, again, the most important things in his life. And so we go through the whole thing. It's very fascinating. I can't imagine being in prison. In his case, he was there for 19 years. He ultimately got out. Just a fantastic story of overcoming, a little bit like the Shawshank Redemption, the character of Morgan Freeman. Not exactly, but there's a lot of parallels. So just really feel blessed to be a part of this one. And that's that. So as always, please go onto my website, markpattisonnfl.com, sign up for the newsletter, posted every week what's going on with my climbs, with what other people are doing. As always, if you could rate and review, it really does help. Please continue to do that. You can find that link again on my website on podcast, and will lead you right to where you need to fill out a ratings and review. And if you know anybody out there who would make a great guest of people overcoming adversity and finding their way, please send me an email. I listen to other podcasts, other more popular people that are out there, and they talk about, I'm so busy and I've got so many people coming at me. So do I, but I do actually return all my emails. So if you have a question, a comment, you have somebody that'd be great for the show, please send them my way, and you can find that through my contact page on my website. Again, markpattisonnfl.com. And of course, this episode is sponsored by our sponsor, Violets Are Blue Skincare. It really does make a big difference. And this was inspired by Cynthia Bestman, who overcame breast cancer and found her way and her passion. And that's putting organic products on her skin. And now they're actually going on my skin because I use her products. They're great. Go to the website. They're amazing. All right, so on that note, let's go talk to Kenyatta. Here we go. Hey, everybody, it's Mark Pattison back again with another fantastic episode of Finding Your Summit. And certainly in this case, we talk about people overcoming adversity and finding their way. And this is going to be a classic episode of somebody who has certainly overcome his trials and tribulations. On the pod, I've got Kenyatta Leal. Did I say that right?
Yes, sir. You got it.
All right. I was kind of freaking out about it, but I am broadcasting from my new home in Sun Valley, Idaho, all the way up to Oakland. And we were just talking about the Oakland Raiders moving on to Las Vegas. It is what it is, but I will always be a Raider at heart. I played for them, and it was a lot of fun, and they still treat me well. So, Kenyatta, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, and shout out to Raider Nation.
Yeah, we love Raider Nation. All right, so look, for the listener, we're going to start off with a big headline. And the big headline is you spent a lot of your lifetime in prison. And I'm not sure why it's so infamous, but San Quentin, you're up there for a number of years. You fell under the 3-strike rule, the law. Man, you've had 2 completely different lives, it seems like. So let's start off with, where did you grow up? And how did you fall into what would even have anybody considered for a 3 strikes for doing anything?
Yeah, I grew up in Southern California in San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
And I grew up in a single parent household. My father abandoned me and my two brothers and my mom. As a young person, I had a lot of friends that had their fathers there. And my father, when he left, he never came back. I never got a birthday card. I never got a Christmas present. I never got a phone call, nothing. I mean, I don't even remember the sound of his voice. As a kid, I grew up feeling like there was something wrong with me and with us as a family because he didn't want to associate himself with us. And my big brother, as a young person, he used to tell me all the time, oh, he's coming back. But the fact that I couldn't bring him back or make him come back made me feel helpless. As a young person, and through those formative years, 8, 9, 10 years old, and into a teen, with this hole in my heart, I felt like there was something wrong with me. And I just started developing this mindset of trying to fill that internal hole with external things to make myself feel like whole. It's kind of hard to explain, but that's what was going through my head as a young person. And I had all these questions about why, but I didn't have any answers. And I had this pain inside me, this traumatic event that happened in my life, but I didn't know how to express it. I didn't know how to process it as a young person. And like I said, I just started trying to fill this internal void with external things.
What kind of neighborhood did you live in?
I lived in a pretty good neighborhood in Southeast San Diego. I mean, we moved around in San Diego County from different places, but my household was pretty good. I mean, my mom worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3 jobs to take care of me and my 2 brothers. I went to good schools. My mom worked really, really hard to make sure that we had that in our lives. But this internal conflict that I had was really the source of me beginning to make bad choices to try to, like I said, fill that void in my life. I started looking up to people who were doing things that weren't good. This is like, you have to remember too, I grew up in the 70s and the 80s. And as I came into my teens, it was the 80s. And then, the crack epidemic hit around 1985, 84, 85, 86, like around that time. I saw a lot of stuff happen in the street. I saw people that I looked up to were getting money in the street. And I've always had this hustle kind of mentality, but I just used it in the wrong way in the street. I had people that I looked up to that kind of like took me under their wing, and I had like easy access to drugs and things that were not necessarily good for me and my path moving forward. And I would hustle those things, selling weed and selling drugs at a young age. And then slowly but surely started moving off into other illegal activities, including robberies, which ultimately led me to prison.
In terms of mentorship, your mom is working 2, 3 jobs. She's out there trying to bust her tail to make ends meet for you and your brothers, as you mentioned. So where was she in all this, and in terms of some of the choices you were starting to make, in terms of being like, look, you can't go down this path, these are the consequences? Was she there for that, or just kind of, again, another void?
No, I mean, my mom was there trying to guide me along the right path. She did the very best that she could. She told me all the right things. But like I said, she was gone a lot. I would come home from school and she wouldn't be home because she'd be at work trying to make ends meet for us as a family. It was during that idle time. And I spent a lot of time in sports and different things. But after that, I was subject to a lot of other things that were happening in the street. And it's those kind of things that I got drawn to, the street activity that I saw. And so one thing led to another, me hanging out more and more and more with the wrong crowd. I eventually ended up dropping out of school. My mom was really upset with that. She was like, if you want to live in my house, then you have to go to school. I was about 17 at the time.
Yep.
She gave me an ultimatum, basically. If you want to stay here, then you have to stay in school. And I didn't want to go to school. I wanted to go to work and I wanted to hang out with my friends. I was hanging out with an older crowd. I didn't listen to my mom. So I ended up moving out at the age of 17 and moving in with some friends, dropping out of high school. And when I look back on my life, I made a ton of bad choices, but I think that was a really significant one for me because it was only a couple years later that I wound up in prison. But
as a parent, right, there's a couple things I know. One is that it's so vitally important to always have a presence in the house. And then the other thing is that with kids, it doesn't matter who you are, where you grew up, having free and idle time as a teenager can be a recipe for disaster. And you put those two things together and just like, wow, watch out. And So, I mean, I can certainly understand how all that happened.
Yeah, when I look back at it now, I understand why it happened. At the time when I was in it, I wasn't really thinking about my future. I wasn't thinking about the impact that the choices that I was making at the time could have on the rest of my future. I was only thinking about right then and what was right in front of me, trying to fit in with this crowd that really wasn't good for me. I was ultimately trying to be somebody that I wasn't, trying to fill that void again.
Well, look, we've all made choices, right? And there's an old adage, and I did not make this up, and it goes back 100 million years, and young and dumb is the word, right?
Oh, yeah.
And it's just like we all have bad judgment as kids, and that's all part of the growing up from being a kid to a boy to a man, of really understanding what those responsibilities are and the kind of choices that you make. And if you don't have the right mentors in place, it can be very devastating, as obviously it was for you in terms of what that path ultimately led for you. So you fell under the 3 strikes. So what were those 3 strikes? What was 1? What was 2? And then ultimately, what was number 3?
So in 1991, myself and a friend of mine robbed a restaurant. And during the course of the robbery, we took money from a safe and a cash register. And there was a person at the safe and a person at the cash register. So there were 2 victims involved there. We actually got away with that robbery, but the person that I committed the robbery with went back a week later and tried to rob the same place again without me. He got caught for doing that, and he made a deal with the prosecutor to basically turn state's evidence on me and basically snitch on me to get less time.
Yep.
So when I got arrested, he told the cops where I was at. They came and got me, arrested me. I spoke to my attorney, and he told me, your crime partner he's going to take the stand on you if you take it to trial. The best thing for you to do is to take a plea bargain. And so I said, well, how much time can I get off for a plea bargain? He said, well, we can get you 5 years. And so within that 5-year plea bargain, it stipulated 2 counts of robbery because, like I said, there were 2 victims involved.
Yep.
I took that plea bargain and ended up going to prison. This was in 1991.
By the way, when they sentence you to 5 years, is it one of these things where they sentence you to 5 years, but you're really only going to get 2? Or when they say 5, they mean 5?
No, they mean 5, but you can reduce the time through good behavior.
Okay.
And so that's kind of what I did. I went to California Institute for Men in Chino, California. From there, I was classified and I was sent to California Correctional Center in Susanville, California. And there I was trained as an inmate firefighter, and I got sent to a fire camp and I fought fires there, and that was considered good behavior. And so I ended up doing about 3.5 years off of the 5 years. But Mark, let me back up for a second, because when I got sentenced to this time, you would think that when a person goes to prison, that when the judge slams down that gavel and gives you a prison sentence, that's like a wake-up call.
Yeah.
That it's time to reflect and try to figure out why you got to that place. I didn't do any of that. I basically was in deep denial about the role that I played in getting there. And I blamed everybody else. It was my homeboy who snitched on me. It was the judge that didn't give me a break. It was all these other things. I was in really deep denial. And so I ended up getting out of prison with the same mindset that I went into prison with. And that's a very dangerous combination.
Okay, so you're in prison, you're doing firefighting and stuff like that. Were you learning any kind of vocational training towards anything beyond just firefighting?
No, that's what I learned. I was able to get out and use the skills that I learned as being a firefighter to work for a tree service. But still, again, I had the same mindset that I went into prison with, and I was still engaged in illegal activity.
And so you're like 18, 19, 20?
Actually, I went in when I was 22.
Okay.
And I got out when I was 25.
Okay.
Now, I went in 1991 with a 5-year sentence for the plea bargain. When I got out, it was 1994. Now, this is significant because in 1994, they passed the 3 strikes law. And basically what happened was the 2 counts of robbery that I pled guilty to, even though they came from one case, they automatically turned into 2 strikes. So when I got out in 1994, I was a 2-striker and didn't even know it.
Yeah.
I thought that the 3 strikes law was for people like Richard Allen Davis that kidnapped and killed Polly Klaas, God bless her soul. But I thought that the law was for that kind of person, a repeat offender. I didn't realize that I could get multiple strikes from one case, but that was the reality of it. And here I am getting out in 1994 with this really dangerous mindset for myself and my community. And about 5 months after my release, I got pulled over on a routine traffic stop and the police found a gun in my car. That served as my third strike. So I got sentenced to 25 to life for being an ex-felon in possession of a firearm.
Wait a minute. So you're not actually pointing the gun on anybody. You're just driving a car and they found a gun that maybe wasn't registered in the trunk or someplace. And for that, you get almost 25 years.
Well, what happened was I had a friend of mine that was with me. It was his gun, but it was in my car. And when we got pulled over, I'm on parole. And so they're able to search my car. When they found the gun, even though it was his, even though he came to court and testified that it was his, even though his fingerprints were on it and mine weren't, even though the gun wasn't used during the commission of a crime, they sentenced me to 25 to life. Not kind of 25, not maybe 25, no, 25 to life. In California, life means life. So only out of prison for 5 months, I got sent right back to prison for being an ex-felon in possession of a firearm with a sentence of 25 to life.
So do you look back on that and you look at it from the standpoint of you shouldn't have been hanging out with this other guy from the first place? Or did you not still recognize at that time between right and wrong? Because of the way you'd grown up, was that just not part of your mindset?
I knew the difference between right and wrong. My problem was that I thought I was slick. I thought that I was smarter than everybody else. I thought that no one could see what I was doing. I thought that I could get away with stuff all the time. That was my problem. And then if I did get busted for doing something, it was always somebody else's fault. And so at that point, when I look back, when I got busted for having the gun in my car, again, I was in deep denial. And my mindset at the time was, how can I avoid the consequences of my behavior? There was nothing else that even mattered at that point. I was just trying to get out of the situation by any means necessary. There was no way out at that point. I was headed to prison.
How many years did you spend of just being resentful? Even though you may have done these things, it just doesn't seem fair, right? It doesn't seem fair in the big scheme of everything. You're in a car with this other guy. There's a gun. You weren't doing anything illegal, right? Necessarily. I mean, maybe you had a gun in the car that was his, that was not registered, but I mean, you weren't threatening everybody. You weren't doing a drug deal. You weren't robbing. None of those things. And it just seems like when the gavel goes down and the judge says you're sentenced to 25 years to life, my heart would just sink and I'd be pissed, right?
Yeah, I was very angry at a lot of people, including the judge. And again, I was in such deep denial about what I did, how my own actions led to the result that I was getting. There's no way that the judge could have given me 3 strikes had I not put myself in a position to get 3 strikes.
Yeah.
But at the time, I didn't see that. The only thing that I saw was my homeboy snitched on me, crazy law that's getting applied in a way that most people didn't realize it was getting applied. And I felt like I was getting done wrong. I wore this victim jacket really, really well. And basically, I was the victim and I just trying to gather all this information to support this position of being a victim rather than holding myself accountable. And I did that for probably the first 5 or 6 years that I was in prison. And I can remember one day when they let you collect calls from inside prison.
Okay.
I used to call a friend of mine all the time, commiserate with him on the phone about how I was being done wrong and all this other stuff. And he used to go along with me on this. But this one particular day when I called him complaining about my appeal not going through, he stopped me dead in my tracks. And he said, bruh, the judge didn't put you in jail. You put yourself in jail. I started to argue with him about it. And he said, you know what? As a matter of fact, don't even call me until you get your shit together. And he hung up the phone on me. And right then I was like, I immediately went into denial mode and I started blaming him for not being a good friend. But his words just kept ringing in my ear. I went back to my cell and I sat down on my bunk and I started thinking about the things that he was saying to me. And the more that I thought about it, the more that I realized that he was right. I was the problem. I made these choices. I put myself in that position. And this is another really significant turning point for me because right then when I realized that I was the problem, I also realized that I must be the solution. Because if I have the power to create all this negativity, then I must have the power to create something different. I just didn't know how to do it. And so it was right then, like right around that time, that I did probably the most important thing that I did when I was in prison, which was learn how to ask for help.
Yeah, that is huge. And there's a lot of guys, a lot of males in particular, that have a really hard time asking for help. And I think the other thing too is, and this is just one of those little secrets that I don't know why it takes a lot of people a long time to figure out, but the sooner that you can really understand about taking accountability, which you have, the faster you're going to have a lot of people around you saying, wait a minute, I want to help this guy.
Absolutely. It's really hard to help somebody that doesn't want to help themselves. And when somebody's in denial and blaming everybody else, and they obviously don't want to help themselves, they're too busy blaming. So yeah, for me, taking responsibility and holding myself accountable, I didn't know how that looked. I didn't know what responsibility looked like. I didn't know what accountability looked like. In prison, you would think that that's a really tough place to find responsibility or accountability, but there are a lot of guys that are inside prison that are on this trajectory of change and transformation in their own lives. And I was fortunate enough to find people in an incarcerated setting that were on this path and try to glean from them information that could help me turn my life around. So I knew that I was wrong. I knew what I did was wrong, and I wanted to make amends for that. But I knew that I had to start with developing insight into how I got to prison in the first place. Because let's face it, I didn't come out of the womb being a thief or a robber or a convict. There was stuff that happened in my life that led me down this path to prison, and I needed to understand why. I didn't want to be one of those people, if the judge ever asked me, why did you wind up in prison, to be saying, I don't know. I needed to figure these things out. Mm-hmm. So I started working with some people in prison that took a liking to me and were trying to help me on this path of transformation and change. And there was this one guy that I remember who, like I said, took a liking to me, wanted to help me. And we were walking the exercise yard one day, and I was telling him about some of the things that I was going through and the changes that I wanted to make. And he's like, well, youngster, what's important to you? Where are your priorities in life? And he gave me a pencil and a piece of paper, and he asked me to write down the 10 most important things in my life. So I wrote them down. I gave him the paper back. He looked at it, and he looked me square in the eye and says, youngster, you got 24 hours in a day. You work 8 hours and you sleep 8 hours. How many of those remaining 8 hours do you devote to these things on this piece of paper that you say are important to you?
Give me one example of one of those things that was on that piece of paper.
One of the things that was really important to me on that piece of paper was my family. I had shamed my family. I had put my mom through so much stuff when I went to prison. And people don't realize this, that when a person gets sent to prison, the family and everybody that's associated with this individual kind of goes to prison with him. My mom and my family did time with me, and I didn't understand. I was being so selfish and I was so caught up in denial that I didn't really understand the pain that I put them through. And I didn't understand the things that they had to go through when I was in prison. And so one of the main things that I really wanted to do was to rebuild those bonds of trust again with my family and basically shut up and listen to what they had to say and try to put myself in their shoes and understand the full scope of the harm that I created, not just on my victims or myself, but on my family too. It's taken a long time. I mean, we're still working on that in a lot of ways, but that was something that I set out to do at the time, and I'm glad that I did. We're a lot better off as a family now because of that.
Okay, so let's go back to that piece of paper. You write down 10 things, you come back, and then you present them to them, and then what's the next step after that?
Well, basically what I realized at that point, that while I was talking about what was important to me, I wasn't actually living it out in my life. He asked me, what's important to you, when I showed him the piece of paper, and I had to be honest with myself about myself and how is this showing up in my life?
Yeah.
So basically what I started to do from that point was align my beliefs about what's important in my life with my actions, my everyday actions, how I live my life, and align those things, bring those two things together. And it was then that I really started to regain control of my life again inside prison.
I love that. I call that my vision board. I'm looking here at my refrigerator, and it's littered with photos and pictures of inspiration. A lot of these mountains I've been on or other things like that. And it's just so important to have your goals, I believe, that are in front of you. I've got up in my bathroom, like what I'm trying to get accomplished. And then the question is something that you did was, what are you going to do to work towards those goals? And You're so right. It's great to have a vision board. It's great to write things down. But if you don't follow the steps, the micro steps to get you to where you want to go, they'll never happen. And that's all they are, is goals.
Yeah.
So it's awesome that you did that. And it's awesome that you had that mentor to come up to you. And really, it sounds like transform your life.
It's a misperception about prison that society has. I mean, society thinks that everybody is just sitting inside prison, plotting out their next caper or their next scheme or their next crime for when they get out. That's definitely not the case. It might be the case in certain instances, but not everyone is in prison trying to do that. There are men and women who are inside who are trying to change their lives and trying to do better.
Sorry to interrupt you, but in this time, the entire time, were you at San Quentin or were you at a series of different prisons?
I was at a series of different prisons. The encounter that I had with the piece of paper, that happened at a different prison. It didn't happen at San Quentin. But I got to San Quentin in 2005. And San Quentin has this notoriety of being like this really super violent place. It's the home of California's death row. There are a lot of stuff has happened at San Quentin. It's the oldest prison in the state. A lot of infamous people have been there.
Yep.
But when I got to San Quentin, what I found were a ton of rehabilitative programs, self-help programs, a college program for higher education, a bunch of different programs that a person who really wants to change can immerse themselves in. And that's exactly what I did. When I got there, I had friends that I knew from other places that I had been that were at San Quentin. They introduced me to the Prison University Project. I got involved in that. You know, one of the things that I wrote down on that piece of paper was my education. That was really important to me. I went back to school. I got my GED. I got involved in the Prison University Project, and I became the first person in my family to get a degree, a college degree, and I did it while I was inside prison.
Wow.
I had dropped out of school in the 11th grade, and I had an opportunity to go to a community college when I got out in 1994, but I was paralyzed by fear. I was 25 years old. I didn't know if I could compete with these young 18 and 19-year-old kids just out of high school. You know, I didn't want to look like a dummy. So I stepped away from that opportunity. But when I got to San Quentin and I found the Prison University Project, I thought, you know what? This is an opportunity for me to make it right. And so I made this goal for myself. I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to get straight A's. And I did it.
So how do you end up in San Quentin? Like you're at a couple of these different prisons. How does that path happen?
Well, when you first enter the prison system, they classify you. There are a number of different things that they use to create this classification score. If you've been in the military, if you're married, what your crime is, if you have kids, all these things, they have a point system. And however many points you end up with, they have 4 different levels, level 4 being the highest and level 1 being the lowest. I ended up going to a level 3 prison initially, but I ended up getting in trouble in prison and they sent me to a level 4 prison. And I had to, through good behavior, I was able to work my way down from a level 4 all the way down to a level 2, which San Quentin is. And that's the lowest that I could go, considering that I had a life sentence. They don't let lifers go to level 1 prisons. And so level 2 is as low as I could go. And I got to give it to God because it was by the grace of God that I wound up at San Quentin and was able to get involved in these programs that have helped me turn my life around.
So question, now you're headed towards San Quentin. Are you still looking at this as 25 years to life?
Well, I still had 25 to life. That hadn't changed. But something that had changed in me from when I had first started was that I could see hope for my future now. I started really working on myself and understanding the things that I needed to do to be a better person and how I could be an asset to the community as opposed to a liability. And it was through this change in this perception of myself and my role in the community there inside prison that helped me develop more and more hope. And hope is something that really carries a person through prison. If you want to make it through prison or through anything, through any kind of adversity, you have to have hope that you can make it. And I always use this like analogy. If you're ever in a pool, just fooling around with some people, and have you ever gotten grabbed by somebody and just like held underwater?
Yeah.
Maybe just a little bit too long.
Yeah.
Start fighting to get to the surface. Well, that's kind of what I felt like in prison, that I was like swimming in the deep end and I had to fight every single day to stay above water so that I could keep breathing. And as long as I did that, as long as I can keep breathing, then I knew that I was going to have a date where I'd be able to go before the judge or before a parole board and let them see the change that I had made in my life, the insight that I developed about myself, and let them see that and hope for the best.
They've got that movie, Shawshank Redemption, I've seen 400 times, and Morgan Freeman plays that great role. He finally starts to educate himself a little bit, and he goes in front of the parole, and every year he just knows he's not going to be released. And then ultimately one day he does. And it sounds a little bit like your situation, a little bit, but the one difference in your situation is that from the movie was that you had this thing called hope, that you actually thought that by educating yourself and immersing yourself in all these different programs that would put you in the best possible position to get released, even though you still have this tag of 25 years to life.
Yeah. Well, if you remember in the movie, what's his name? Dufresne and Red and them are sitting in the chow hall and they start talking about hope. And Morgan Freeman had been shot down a couple times by the parole board. And he was telling Dufresne that, hey, hope is a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
It could get you caught up. And their buddy had hung himself when he got out. He said, look what Hope got. What was his name? I forget his name. Brooks. That was his name. Brooks, the older guy. He got out. And he didn't know where to go.
He was in a grocery store or something like that. He couldn't hang.
Exactly. And so what happened was later on in the movie, Dufresne had asked Morgan Freeman about something that he loved to do, and it was playing harmonica. And he ended up giving the little harmonica. I don't know if you remember this, but he gave a harmonica to Morgan Freeman, Red, to kind of connect him beyond the wall so that he could have hope. And he didn't play it at first, but he started playing it a little bit. And that was a big deal because it made him remember the possibilities about life. Just because you're in prison, you never, ever, ever want to give up that light at the end of the tunnel. And it's a choice that all of us make. And he saw that Red had made that choice to kind of blind himself from that light, but he gave him that harmonica. It helped him remember. And he started educating himself and stuff, but he ended up getting out. And for me, it's kind of the same thing. I had people in my life that just intervened, man, and helped me stay focused on that light at the end of the tunnel, helped me have hope. And then I remember seeing, when I got to San Quentin, like I said, there were a ton of guys that were there engaged in this process of change. And it was at San Quentin where I saw the first person that I'd ever seen with a life sentence get out of prison. This was a guy who had a gang-related murder. He was involved in a murder of another individual, but he was a leader inside San Quentin. He had transformed himself. He had gotten educated, became a facilitator of all these programs. He had done all the right things. He got shot down by the parole board about 5 times, just like Morgan Freeman did. Yep. But guess what? He kept going, and then he got found suitable and he got out. And then I saw another person get out and another person and another person. I was like, wow, this could happen for me if I continue forward, if I stay focused on this light at the end of the tunnel, if I continue to work on myself, my day is going to come too. And sure enough, in 2012, California passed Prop 36, which was an amendment to the 3 strikes law, which made me eligible for resentencing. But it wasn't like a slam dunk. It wasn't like a get out of jail free card. I actually had to go before the judge, the same judge who sentenced me to life in prison, and demonstrate to him that I was no longer a danger to the community. And so I had put together all the good stuff that I had done, as well as all the not so good stuff that I had done when I was in prison, held myself accountable for that, presented it to the judge. He reviewed everything and he agreed to resentence me to 7 years. And about 5 days after my resentencing, I walked out of San Quentin a free man after 19 years in prison.
That's incredible.
And a life sentence.
So let's go back to prison before we go forward into what you're doing today, which is remarkable. Is it hard when you're in prison? I've never been in prison, so I have no idea. Is it hard to keep your nose clean? And not necessarily that you're looking for trouble, like you're on this path, right? You're reading, you're learning, you're involving yourself in these different programs that San Quentin has set up. But there's this element inside the walls. I'm making this up. There's that element inside the walls that's still like you walk around the corner and somebody's got their eye on you and they want to beat you up or drag you in somehow or another, that there's going to be trouble lurking around the corner.
Absolutely. There's always that element of danger in prison. Well, let me kind of put this into context. Prison is a very, very racially charged environment. When you go into prison, you have to align yourself with your race. Yep. So, Mark, if you were to go to prison, you're white, you would have to align yourself with the white guys. If you hung around with the black guys or the Mexican guys, then the white guys would want to do something bad to you because they would look at you as a traitor. So everything revolves around race. And so inside prison, it being in such a racially charged environment, certain things like drama can happen between racial factions. So like, say there was something that happened that I didn't have anything to do with between a white guy and a black guy. Next thing you know, a riot happens between blacks and whites. And basically what happens is it doesn't matter if you're involved in it or not. There's no discrimination then.
Yep.
When it's a green light between whites and blacks, that means that if you're on the yard or something happens, you have to get involved. And if you don't get involved, then your own race will do something to you, and more often than not. Now, that happens a lot on the level 4 and the level 3 yards. But as you get down to lower and lower minimum security prisons, there's less and less of that kind of violence. Mm-hmm. And at San Quentin, there's hardly any of it. They have incidents there, but San Quentin is probably the lowest level security prison, certainly that I've been to, but the environment there is completely different. And one of the things that I attribute that to is the programs there, education programs, self-help programs. They actually change the hearts and minds of the men that are there, and through that, actually change the culture of the prison and the yard.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And as you're describing all this, it almost sounds like a incarcerated college. And that's not probably the right word, but it's just like there's such a drive towards all these different programs. And then you sprinkle in that little thing called hope. And people start to really understand, like, well, wait a minute, if I'm not out there brawling with guys and having all these racially charged conflicts, then certainly there's an opportunity to one day walk free and get out of this place. So let's talk about Last Mile. So how I originally found you was through Chris Redditz. And I was actually listening to Lance Armstrong's podcast, and he had a few different former inmates on, and Chris. And I was just like, what is this Last Mile? And so I went and I Googled it, and I was just fascinated by all these educational programs that were going down. In this case, it's an entrepreneurial endeavor that has launched at San Quentin. And so all these amazing things have come out of it, and people like yourself have found success. And other people from outside the wall have come in from Facebook and other programs. Other companies had an impact on these different guys' lives and actually hired some of these different people that have been released. So tell me about Last Mile.
Yeah, so the Last Mile is a phenomenal program headed up by Chris Redlitz and his wife, Beverly Parenti. Chris got invited to San Quentin in 2009 or 2010, somewhere around that time. And I had been at San Quentin for a few years then and was already deeply engaged in my process of change. I had graduated from college and was, a facilitator of a bunch of different programs and stuff. And one of the programs that I was involved in was a financial literacy program. And Chris was invited to come in and give a talk about business and entrepreneurship. If you know where San Quentin is geographically located, it's in Marin County, which is a really affluent community in Northern California. And Chris used to take the ferry from Marin into San Francisco every day because he was a venture capitalist. His office was in San Francisco. So he used to ride the ferry past San Quentin every day, look at it, didn't give it really two thoughts. Place where a bunch of convicts are at. That's it. Somebody from the community in Marin invited him into San Quentin to give this talk. He thought he'd come in and do maybe a half-hour talk or whatever and then leave. But what he found when he entered San Quentin were a group of men that were really, really smart, really engaged, and really focused on business, and they wanted to learn. And Chris came in that day and he left about 3 hours later, just blown away by what he'd seen. What he saw at San Quentin were a bunch of men who had the same kind of aptitude as the founders and CEOs of the companies that he invests in as a venture capitalist. And he came up with this idea, wow, wouldn't it be great if we could start an entrepreneurship accelerator inside San Quentin? And so Chris approached the prison administration and some of the volunteers there about the best path forward. He got approval to do it. He came in. He's like, who can we build this program around? And I was selected to be part of the first cohort. And so when I was presented with this idea of an entrepreneurship program, I thought, wow, this is a great opportunity because like I said earlier, I've always had this hustle mentality, this entrepreneurial spirit. I just used it in the wrong way in the street. And so I saw my relationship with Chris and Beverly and my association with them as being a great opportunity for me to learn the truth about entrepreneurship and learn how to do it in the right way. And so we teamed up and we started the Last Mile. Myself, Chris, Beverly, a gentleman by the name of James Houston, David Monroe, James Cabot, and another guy named Eric. We all started the program together. And basically what the program initially revolved around was figuring out what you're passionate about and then figuring out how to solve a problem with that passion through the form of a business.
Yep.
So that's what we did. We figured out what we were passionate about. We came up with these ideas. We distilled those down into some really succinct business plans. And then we learned how to pitch these ideas at the culmination of our program, which was a demo day. That's like our graduation. And through this learning process, Chris and Beverly were bringing in a bunch of people from the San Francisco Silicon Valley tech community to help guide us and help mentor us and help us learn about entrepreneurship. And one of the people that they brought in was a gentleman by the name of Duncan Logan. He's the founder of a company called Rocket Space based in San Francisco. It's a technology campus, home to a bunch of different startups. Duncan was coming in. He was helping us with our pitches. And he came to our demo day. And after our demo day, I just hit him up. I'm like, man, if I got out of here tomorrow, would you give me a job? And he said, yes. This was in May of 2012. In November of 2012, Prop 36 passed, and I was released in July of 2013. I was released from prison. And about 10 days after I was released, I contacted Mr. Logan, and I was like, do you remember me? What's going on with this job? Is there still an opportunity? And he said, yes. And I started at Rocket Space as an intern. He gave me an opportunity as an intern. And I didn't go into Rocket Space with a college degree in computer science or business management or any of that. But I did go in with this really, really strong hustle mentality. And I told Duncan, I said, man, I don't care what I have to do here. If I got to scrape gum off the floor, if I got to make coffee or dump trash, I'm going to be the best gum scraping, coffee making, trash dumping person that you've ever seen at Rocket Space. Just give me a chance. And I was able to work my way up from an intern into a management role and now into sales. But the last mile helped create this opportunity for me, and it's helping create a lot of other opportunities in software development now. We started the program in 2010 just with pure entrepreneurship. In 2014, we pivoted towards coding. And now we're teaching software development to men and women on the inside. And we have guys that went through our program at San Quentin that have been released and are now working with like Chan Zuckerberg Foundation, Fandom, a bunch of different tech companies that we've placed people from our program into jobs at. And we're helping change lives and helping change the narrative about what's possible for people leaving incarcerated settings.
Yeah, that's awesome. What was your pitch?
Well, I told you earlier that I love football.
Yeah.
My pitch was a mobile app called Coach Potato. And basically what it is an online coaching experience. So have you ever been watching a game and wanted to go for it on 4th and 1, but you couldn't?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Coach Potato gives you an opportunity to do that because if you call the right plays while you're watching the game, you're looking at your mobile phone or your tablet, and you can call plays for your favorite team. And if you call the right plays, then you earn points. You can level up in ranking and win prizes.
That's awesome. I probably could have used that back in the day when I was actually playing. If somebody like you was out there at Coach Potato and say, go for it, man, I would have been, it could have changed a lot of things. But so what was that like when the prop gets passed and now you're going to be released and it's that moment, that threshold that you walk through from prisoner to free man? I'm talking about the door opens up and you are on the other side of the wall.
Yeah.
And by the way, who was there to greet you when you walked out?
That's a great question. Well, when I first got out, I had a number of people. My girlfriend was there. Chris and Beverly were there. And other people that were part of my support system were there to greet me on the other side of the gate. But when I walked out of San Quentin, I mean, people have asked me this question a lot about how it felt. And I truly can't put it into words. If there was one word that I could use, I would just say joy. It felt so good. There's no word that I could use to fully capture what it felt like. But I often wish that I was able to take that feeling and put it in a bottle so that I could take it and walk around and pour everybody a cup of what it tastes like so that they could take a sip of that and really understand what it feels like. It was just amazing because here I was sitting in prison with a life sentence, had gone through all this stuff, and now I was finally free again.
Yeah, it sounds like a feeling of gratefulness.
That too. Yep.
Right.
I mean, there was no way that I would have made it through that by myself. There was no way that I'd be where I am today had not people invested their time and energy and believing in me on what I can do. And I had a lot of people that come along into my life and help guide me in the right direction. So yeah, a ton of gratitude. So grateful.
I want to take this thing full circle and go back to where we started, your mother. Where was she at this time when you got released?
My mom lives in Arizona. She wasn't able to travel to San Quentin when I got out, but I immediately went to go see her, though.
Yeah, and the reason why I say that is because you mentioned your words that she was so disappointed in all the choices that you had made, and you took accountability for all those things ultimately. But the disappointment that she had of all parents like to brag on their kids, and at that time, that would have been a hard thing to do for her. And for you to go through and reset everything and go through the educational system and ultimately win your release, and now you're working at Rocket Space and public speaking and doing other things. What a phenomenal transformation for anybody to make it through something like that. I don't know. I'm putting words in your mother's mouth, but it sure seems to me she would have gone from complete disappointment to so proud of you and what you accomplished.
My mom was definitely disappointed in the choices that I had made, but she never lost hope in me. My mom always saw the light at the end of the tunnel for me. She used to come to visit me at every prison that I was at. She wrote me letters. She sent me money. She supported me, accepted my collect calls. My mom never, ever, ever gave up hope on me. And so she always supported me, even through the toughest times. She always loved me, that unconditional love that a mother has for her children. That's my mom. And she's always been one of my biggest supporters. And she's very, very proud of the changes that I've been able to make. I just don't know where I'd be without her. She's been my rock this whole time.
Yeah, well, I say this a number of times on these podcasts because it's about people overcoming their adversity, and you certainly have had yours. There's no question it takes a village. And your village had a lot of people in there. It was Chris and Beverly, and it had a lot of people, the mentors that you talked about, the guy that gave you a piece of paper, your mother. And I'm sure there's a whole lot of other folks that are on that list, but it's choices. And sometimes you have to put yourself in the best position to have those things come at you, and you never know what happens. And in your case, you seriously turned it around. I'm so proud of you.
Thank you so much. I remember before I told you that, at the time that I was making these choices, I didn't really understand the impact that they would have on my future. But as time has gone by, one of the things that I really learned that was really powerful for me in prison was that there's only two things that come out of a choice that you make, and that's a consequence or a reward. And I had to stop and look at myself and be honest with myself about my life. What was I experiencing more of, consequences or rewards? And when I was in prison with a life sentence, that's a heck of a consequence that you have to live with. And so for me, it was all about changing my life, changing the way that I think so that I could change the way that I behave and get a different result out of life. And now today I'm experiencing so many rewards from the choices that I make. And I'm just super grateful for all the support that I've received over the time.
Well, there's no question that you are for sure a reward for me to be on this podcast, and very grateful for that. You're also public speaking out there, right?
Correct. And so I recently just put in my 2 weeks notice with Rocket Space.
Yeah.
I'm going to be joining the Last Mile team full time. I'm going to be doing a lot more evangelist work for the organization. I'm sharing my story, going into different prisons around the country and working with men and women to help them turn their lives around too. This is truly my passion, more than Coach Potato. I love football, but I love helping people even more. So this is really my calling. And I feel just really grateful for the opportunity to be of service to the men and women who need the help. Same kind of help that I got, I want to be able to return to these men and women who are coming out too.
That's great. And where can people find you?
They can find me at Kenyatta Leal on Twitter. I'm on Facebook, and you can reach out to me at thelastmile.org. You can go to our website and check us out there, and I'm available there as well.
Okay, we'll put all those things in the show notes. Well, listen, I truly am grateful for you coming on the show. It's so amazing that this transformation, everything you've gone through, I can't imagine. And then the best part of this whole thing is that you're paying it forward now by going back into the prison system and really trying to evangelize how people can actually transform their life. And that's impactful. So congratulations.
Thank you so much. You have me on the show. And if I could be just a small glimmer of hope for somebody else to help them in their process of change, then man, I feel like I've done something good.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for the opportunity.
Fantastic. All right, buddy. Have a great day, and I appreciate you coming on.
You do the same, my friend. Have a good one.
Okay. Hey, and thank you so much for listening to the Find Your Summit podcast. We are so glad to have you along for this journey. And if you enjoy the show, please tell a friend, share it on iTunes, spread it to the planet. We're looking to broadcast this to every person that is out there because, as you know, everybody has their own summit that they're going after. If you're looking to follow my journey, you can find that through my social links on markpattisonnfl.com. That's Mark, M-A-R-K, Pattison, P-A-T-T-I-S-O-N, NFL.com. Until the next podcast, just remember, clear eyes, full hearts, and remember, it takes a little more to make a champion, so make it happen. Thank you. Bye.